This looks like the shroud was suspended over Jesus at a time it was taken, the time it would occurred, because you see there's absolutely no cloth laying distortion anywhere on the body. It's almost like the body was levitated and the image was imposed on the linen at the moment of the resurrection, in which I believe the body did levitate. The cloth was then beneath Jesus and above Jesus, but there's no indications on this body that it was lying down, pressing against the cloth, or the cloth across the front was laying across Jesus' image and becoming distorted. This is absolutely a perfect image of a human being. This has never even been reproduced crudely, let alone in the expert fashion you're looking at. This is truly miraculous. It's never been explained, and I don't think it's explicable except through divine intervention. And so I think this image is remarkable, not only for its historical importance, but also for its spiritual importance, of understanding that this is a spiritual reality in which we live, and it only appears physical, but it is not, in essence, a physical reality.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Thank you so very much for coming on back to the show. That was my good friend and author, Dr. Jerome Corsi, and this is without a doubt one of the most powerful broadcasts you may ever hear. It is really beyond scientific doubt that the Shroud of Turin is indeed the burial linen that wrapped the body of the crucified Lord Jesus Christ. And we recorded this interview just prior to finding out that there is now a law being passed that will prevent you from ever quoting the New Testament regarding the Jews' involvement in the crucifixion of the Lord Jesus Christ. We live in interesting times, to say the very least. Thank you so much for tuning in, friends. Before we start, just one quick word from a very important sponsor. We've told you the truth about the destruction and the demise of the US dollar and its purchasing power on this channel for more than a decade. So how do you feel about leaving your money in the bank? Not great, right? It's losing value every single day because it's being debased. So if it's stressing you out, why not invest smarter with Noble Gold Investments? Precious metals are simple and real, tangible wealth. And by the way, gold just broke a new all-time high in USD. There isn't a company on the stock market that was around 2,000 years ago, but guess what? Gold was. It's a reliable, dependable, and authentic way to protect your wealth. That's why you can't go wrong with precious metals. They always have your back. Noble Gold Investments is the same. Their American-based experts will show you how to set and forget your IRA or 401k. Now, there's no guarantee of any kind with any investment, so do your own due diligence, but you'll get a dedicated professional assigned to you from Noble Gold. So no hassle, no call centers. This month, Noble Gold Investments is giving a free quarter-ounce gold standard coin with every qualifying IRA investment. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com to claim your gold coin. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Hey friends, welcome back. Thank you so very much for tuning in. It's Sean from SGT Report. Guys, I have a real treat here for you today. And as you all know, spiritual warfare on planet Earth is not only alive and well, it's enveloping the entire globe. And those with eyes to see and ears to hear recognize it, while many others are still sound asleep. But I think we're reaching a tipping point, and the power of the story about which you're going to hear right now should move you and move your spirit. I certainly hope it does. The Shroud of Turin has moved my spirit over time. It is said to be, and I believe it to be, the burial linen of the Lord Jesus Christ, and a three-dimensional photograph, as Dr. Jerome Corsi explains to me, a photograph of the exact moment of resurrection. Now, it has not been debunked. It can't be debunked. And we're going to play some clips in this interview with Dr. Corsi, proving to you how extraordinary this artifact is, in fact, the most extraordinary artifact in the history of humankind. Let's welcome our guest right now. He wrote an entire book about it called The Shroud Codex. Dr. Jerome Corsi is back. How are you, Doc?
I'm great, Sean. It's great to be back with you. The Shroud Codex is a novel. It's the first novel I've written. And it's now being made, it has been made into a screenplay by Tony and his wife, Elise Lobianco. Tony's a very well-known actor. He was in The French Connection and many other films. And there's interest in making it into a motion picture. So I think that's going to happen. And I'm thrilled to be with you. I've seen The Shroud in person 3 times in Italy. And I'm 100% convinced it is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. And what we're looking at is a photograph of the moment of resurrection. It was actually photographed. I'll explain how in the book and how I think it was done. And it is a life-changing experience to really embrace the Shroud of Turin, because it brings us to the most important moment of Christendom, which is Jesus Christ's resurrection. And it documents it in a way that I think is going to be more widely recognized in the years to come. And I'm very pleased that you're doing this program.
Oh, I'm so glad you wrote a book about it. As I told you in our last interview about your newest book, proving the CIA's involvement in the assassination of our dear President John F. Kennedy, I didn't realize you had written a book about the Shroud, something that has always moved my spirit. And I said, we got to get you scheduled. Here we're back to do this. And I'm so happy to start with this soundbite from Father Andrew Dalton. Father Andrew Dalton went through seminary school, became a priest, and only later did he realize that there was an entire school of thought, an entire series of classes you could take, a one-year seminary just studying the Shroud of Turin. And he sat down for a presentation by a woman about the Shroud, and he didn't think, he literally told his friend, look, I don't have much time. I can sit for 5 or 10 minutes. I have a plane to catch. He was so gripped by the information she conveyed that he stayed and then talked to her for 3 or 4 hours after, and he's dedicated his life now to researching the Shroud of Turin. I want to play this soundbite about the artifact and the documentation, a monument and a document.
What you're looking for is monumentum et documentum, right? That you have a monument and a document. And of course, we're all familiar that there are documents telling about Jesus's passion, but many people don't know about the Shroud, at least to the degree that one can know. And so here's what happened with Emanuela. I stayed talking with her. She said, wait till you come back next week, because there's a physicist who'll be speaking.
Yeah, if you lost sleep last night.
Yes, exactly. And he was just that way. His name is Paolo Di Lazzaro. He spent 5 years, this guy, just trying to reproduce by ultraviolet light.
That's amazing.
On a linen, just playing with the variables of light, amplitude, frequency, duration of exposure, so that he could recreate an image like that of the man of the Shroud on another linen.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy made himself famous when he published an article saying that the amount of energy you would need to recreate a similar image would be 34,000 billion watts. And of course, you've probably bumped into this on the internet, no? But
what does that look like?
Well, it's not a matter of what it looks like so much as, I mean, what it
would
looks
that
like.
Do?
Well, here's the trouble. You see, this is why it took 5 years, right? Because he took these different variables of light, trying to reproduce something caramel colored on a linen.
Yeah.
But it was frustrating because he got either nothing or just charred the linen altogether.
Yeah.
Which obviously we don't have.
Okay, guys, I just wanted to play that. Father Andrew Dalton goes on to explain that in the history of crucifixions, there was never a documentation or an account of a man who had been crucified in the way Jesus was while wearing a crown of thorns, which is depicted in the Shroud of Turin. So much more to cover here, including the very first photograph of the Shroud and proofs that the Shroud could not be faked. Doc, don't want to steal your thunder, just want to level set for the audience. Where do you want to begin?
Well, let's begin with the photographs. I mean, the Shroud has been around for hundreds of years, and the question of its origin we can get to as well, but it was in 1898 when an Italian amateur photographer, his name was Secondo Pia, he was allowed to photograph the Shroud. And what he found when he went into the darkroom with his negatives, he was shocked when he realized that the negative produced a face. You could see the face, because, of course, the Shroud itself is a negative. So the negative is a positive, and the face jumped out at him. And he said that he felt he was looking back. He was the first person since Christ died to look in the living face of Jesus Christ. And so this was a shocking discovery. And the church was skeptical about it because in the 1890s, they thought maybe Secondo Pia had committed a fraud. It wasn't really until 1931 when Giuseppe Erni, who was an Italian professional photographer, was permitted to photograph the Shroud a second time, and he got the same results, that you see very clearly the face of Jesus. Reverently, it's a magnificently I've seen it 3 times. It's just very moving. It's so dignified, and you can see the pain and the suffering. You can see the crown of thorns. You can see the bleeding. You can see the nose has been broken. But yet the beard, the hair, the way the eyes are closed, the composure of the face is a very, very inspiring tranquility to this, that you wonder how someone who went through the sufferings that this person went through could yet have transitioned to such a peaceful state.
Yeah.
That's always intrigued me about the Shroud.
If I can just interrupt for 1 second, I just want to play now a clip from Father Andrew Dalton talking about that first photograph. And as I show an image of the Shroud, guys, keep in mind, throughout human history, this was believed to be the burial linen of the Lord Jesus Christ. But what no one understood until the advent of photography, and only through the advent of photography, was the miracle of the Shroud of Turin revealed for what it is. Listen to this.
Okay. This is slide 4. It's a picture of Secondo Pia. Mm-hmm. This is the amateur photographer that snapped the first photo of the Shroud in 1898. It's about 60 years after the invention of these first dactylographs. This is a monstrous machine. You can see it on, if you go to Turin, they have it on display in the museum there. And this guy, I love this. Like, what if you're the family that owns the burial shroud of Jesus, and you like to add a little pageantry to your family wedding or baptism? You just, I'll whip out that burial shroud of Jesus.
Did you get that photo up? Oh, you got it. Yeah.
Of Secondo Pia. Yeah. So this is the guy that after 15 minutes of developing the film goes into the dark room. And in this next slide 3.
That is just,
this is great. So
this is the one everyone's seen.
Yeah, so this is an image of the face. Now we're zoomed in on the face. And on the right side of the screen.
Get that
number 5. It's the juxtaposition of the two facial images. On the right, it's the positive image, the linen itself in beige. And if we're honest, like, okay, I can kind of make out a face. Like, there's 2 eyes, there's a nose, something like a mustache and a beard if I'm kind of creative and I squint a little bit. But if we're honest, like, it's hard to make out the details. But Secondo Pia was the first one to ever lay eyes on the photo negative.
Wow.
And so he goes to the dark room, and after a time, very slowly, this image comes to fruition. Yeah. And so he sees, like, for example, I like to mention the eyes, because if I were to ask you, just pointing at the positive image, the one of the linen, like, where are the boundaries of the eyeballs? You might be very inclined to, like, do like a Bart Simpson kind of thing where you have these big bulging eyebrows, because it seems like these are the outlines to the eyes. And that explains, by the way, many icons that show again and again Jesus with all of these same characteristics, one of them being these bulging eyes. But when you get to the negative of that, all of a sudden you see a very clear, intelligible human face, that this is marking the subtle contours around the eye sockets, the details of the separation of the lips. You've got this swelling in the cheeks. You've got a separated septum. If you come 2/3 down the nose, you can see that the cartilage has been separated according to the American scientists. The beard has been plucked.
Wow.
You can see things like the arterial blood that flows near the temple. That's from the frontal vein that's here at the center of the forehead. We could go on and on about some of these details.
Keep doing it.
We will. But what I want to say now is that the first thing to be noticed in 1898 was that this was too good to be true.
I see.
Instead of applauding Secondo Pia, they
accused him,
pointed fingers at him to say, come on, where did you really get this?
Okay. I think it's very important. Again, the crown of thorns, the blood, and we can get into the blood. Did you guys know that underneath the blood, there is no negative? The blood was protected. This is so miraculous and divine that, in my words, it defies explanation. And they've tried to pin this, right? Officialdom, Jerome, has tried to pin this on Leonardo da Vinci, or they've tried to make any excuse in the world to say this is a fake and a forgery, and yet that is absolutely false. And a forgery can't be proven here. In fact, they can't even duplicate this with all the technology we have today. It's, in my mind, it's an absolute miracle. It's divine. Jerome?
Well, I agree entirely. If you go back to the picture that was being shown there of the way the shroud really looks and the way the negative looks, I want to make a couple points about that. And what you see, okay, is if all you saw was the shroud, and by the way, having seen the shroud, this is what it looks like in person. you do not see the negative image on the left. You see what it looks like as the shroud itself is a negative. So it's hard to make out the image. You have to concentrate to see the image in the negative form on the actual shroud. Now, one of the points that I like to make is that if you assume that some medieval painter forged the shroud, like Leonardo da Vinci or someone else, how could they have been brilliant enough to understand how photographic negatives work? They hadn't been invented yet. And so the idea that, a negative is such that when you shine the light through it, what's dark on the negative is going to be white in the positive because it's blocking light getting through. It's a complicated process. And so a medieval forger who thought to paint a negative image, why would you do it? You'd paint a positive image. And how could it be so perfectly done? If we go to the way the positive image looks, it's also anatomically correct. That's the key point here. It's anatomically correct. The blood flows, the crown of thorns, and it's consistent with the biblical description of Jesus' suffering and death. So the way the face was battered, the broken nose, the swollen cheeks, the blood flows in the head coming from particular veins in the forehead. The saturation of blood, the blood flows around the hair or the crown of thorns. And by the way, the crown of thorns it was a skull crown. It covered his entire upper head, including the top of the head. It wasn't just a rim around the sides. They took and somehow or other made a whole cap. It was more of not a crown of thorns, but a cap of thorns that they placed on his head. And they pushed it down into the head. So it was puncturing the scalp and causing severe bleeding. And that, again, the idea that a medieval painter could have painted, a negative and had it anatomically correct stretches the imagination. I mean, even if you take a look at, I've studied Leonardo da Vinci's drawings where he would he'd take bodies that were dead and he would dissect them in order to see what was inside, and he drew detailed drawings of the internal of the body. Some of the first drawings we have, and they're very good, but they're nowhere accurate like this. They're nowhere precise like this. And the precision is what makes this so compelling an image. There's one other thing I want to point out, and that is, as we go through this, you're going to see that while the shroud, Jesus was laid on the shroud, and then it was a long piece of cloth that was wrapped over his head and put down across the front of his body. So the shroud was long enough to cover the body, with the body lying against it, and then also to cover the body across the top when it was folded over the head. But if you look at that image of the shroud, it doesn't look like the cloth was laying on the face. Because if you laid the cloth on the face, you'd have a distorted positive. It would look differently. The shroud would have sunk down into the eye sockets. It would have contoured with the face, and the image that you would have produced would not look like this image looks. This looks like the shroud was suspended over Jesus at a time it was taken, the time it occurred, because you see there's absolutely no cloth laying distortion anywhere on the body. It's almost like the body was levitated and the image was imposed on the linen at the moment of the resurrection, in which I believe the body did levitate. The cloth was then beneath Jesus and above Jesus, but there's no indications on this body that it was lying down, pressing against the cloth, or the cloth across the front was laying across Jesus' image and becoming distorted. This is absolutely a perfect image of a human being. And when you take a look at the scourge marks on the back, on the legs, all across the back, again, these are biblically correct. They also have been studied. They have exactly like Romans did their scourge whips. They have little pieces of metal at the end of each of these thongs in the whip that are like barbells with two round parts to it, and a bar that connects the two round parts. They're small, but they dig into the flesh. So when you're hit with these, you're hit with metal that digs into your flesh and tears the flesh. And in fact, the scourge marks on Jesus' body, studied microscopically, show images that are faithful to the way the Romans created their flagellum or their whips. And that's pretty amazing.
It's incredible. And let me just interject. The point you just made is such a good one, because when I think of the shroud, and when those familiar in the audience probably think of the shroud, they think of the burial cloth of Jesus Christ and the face and the frontal image of the body of the man who was crucified. But the shroud is such a miracle. It also produced a photograph of the back of the man who was crucified with all of the scourge marks. And I was just going to bring that point up. I'm so glad you did, because you know what is not disputable at this point is that this is definitely the photograph of a human being who was crucified. The question then is, was it Jesus Christ, or was it just some random criminal? And the point that I like to make time and time again is that no, it's not a random criminal. By the way, Jesus Christ wasn't a criminal. He was crucified, he was mocked, and he was killed. He was murdered because he was a threat to the establishment. He was a threat to the controllers. And they made him they forced him to wear this crown of thorns. And according to history, as I understand it, there's never been a crucifixion of another man wearing a crown of thorns. Do I have that wrong, Doc?
No, it's not usual. I don't know ever been anyone except Jesus Christ who was crucified with thorns. Because first of all, what was Roman crucifixion? It was a punishment for severe crimes, against the state, treason, etc. And there were the Romans were expert at crucifixion. So if they wanted somebody to die slowly, they would tie the hands and legs onto the cross and let the person die slowly. If they really wanted him to die slowly, they'd give him a little sedalium, a seat to sit on so he could relieve the breathing. If they were, as this body indicates, the severe scourging would have gotten Jesus just to the point of death. You take a look, the buttocks, the legs, in the back, and the front, he scourged at almost every inch of his body, from the neck down. And the scourging is vicious and multiple and from both sides. So he was scourged both from someone from the right and from the left. Because you can tell the scourge marks that come from a right-handed, left-handed, on one side of the body and the other side of the body. They must have done this in a team.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, and so this would have just about killed them. But if the Romans killed somebody before they were crucified, then the Romans got punished for doing it wrong. So they had to punish. And the crown of thorns, by the way, is symbolic of the fact that they said Jesus was King of the Jews. This was the whole idea. He was King of the Jews. And part of his inquisition by Pontius Pilate was whether he was God or not. And Jesus said, "You've said that, not me." Okay, and Jesus was not claiming to be the King of the Jews. This was a mockery. This was an insult. The King of the Jews has a crown of thorns and is being beaten by the Romans who are going to kill him. So the point is to beat him just to the point of death so they can yet crucify it, because they want him to die quickly on the cross. Now, that's another point here. Jesus was crucified, and the Sabbath was coming the next very few hours. So they had a little time to do it. They had to get Jesus out. They had to mercilessly punish him, bring him to the point of death, keep him alive, get him to carry the cross up to the point of crucifixion, crucify him, and have him die in a short period of time. So they had to manage that. If they messed up, the Romans were punished for doing it wrong. They had specific orders. So this body reflects a purpose and how this man was first beaten, tortured, and reduced in his strength so he could carry the cross, at least to some extent, and die quickly on the cross, but yet make it to that point. That's a critical normally crucifixion would not be nailing to the cross. They're really angry at this guy. And by the way, he would die of asphyxiation, because without a seat to sit on, every time he wanted to take a breath, involved pushing down on the nails in the feet so he could raise himself to get a breath, and then letting the breath out, which was going to, again, put pressure on the nails through the wrists. And by the way,
right there. See that right there? See?
Yep.
He nailed him right through his wrist.
That's right, because there are a set of bones in the wrist that if you nail through them, it's going to hold. If you put it in the center of the wrist, which is the way a lot of pictures are shown of the crucifixion, that's the wrong place to nail somebody, because that'll just rip through the fingers. That won't hold. You've got to have a nail that will support the weight of the body on the cross and keep it there. And that's the one place you can nail in the wrist. Now, again, how did a medieval forger know that? That's a detail that the Roman executioners would have known. It's a detail that modern anatomists know, that people who have studied the body understand that that's where you'd have to place the nail. Been studied. And look also at the fingers. The way the fingers are bent in shows that the nerve right in there has been damaged, and the fingers kind of collapse in on each other. So they form more of a kind of a cone as they're pinched together. You can see that especially in the right arm underneath, how the fingers come together. That's a clear indication that the nail went through that nerve and caused the hand to convulse into a unnatural posture, which again is anatomically correct. Also, the blood flows on the arms indicate that the arms were elevated, because the blood flows reflect blood running down the arms that are stretched out on the cross laterally. So all the anatomical features in this, which is the remarkable thing about it, if a forger had done this, would have had to have had knowledge of human anatomy, knowledge of Roman crucifixion, which was not common knowledge in the Middle Ages. In fact, it wasn't common when the Romans did it. And I'm not sure the Romans understood the depth of the anatomy and how the body worked. They just knew this was the place you drive a nail. Well, if you drive it wrong, it goes through, a major vein, and the guy's going to bleed to death. So it has to be done precisely, that nail being positioned. It's expert to do this.
The other thing a forger would have to know, and I mean, a forger, give me a break. This is ridiculous to even have that discussion. But the other thing a forger would have to know is a complete and total understanding of negative photography before photography existed at all. Beyond that, you make an excellent point. So the body was wrapped in the linen, and this photograph, this divine intervention, this divine historical recording of the man who died and was crucified on the cross and died for our sins, Jesus Christ, his father took an image in the negative of it. And if the body was wrapped in the cloth sitting on a stone, how do you explain the perfect photography of the back? I think you're spot on. I think the body was levitating at the moment of this photograph, and you'd make the argument that the photograph occurred at the exact moment of resurrection. Guys, if you're not gripped by this conversation, boy, I don't know what else to do for you. This, to me, is the most important artifact in the history of mankind. And I'll play a clip in just 1 second about some of the proofs that this is real and proofs that it couldn't be faked in just 1 second. But go ahead, Jerome.
Well, I was going to say, Jesus was hung on the cross for 3 hours, at least 3 hours. And he was not dead when the sun was going down. So the problem was he was crucified on Friday, and he had to be buried before the Jewish Sabbath began at sundown on Friday. So according to Jewish law, his body had to be taken from the cross and buried before the start of the Sabbath, which means the followers of Jesus did not have much time. Before the Roman soldiers allowed the followers to take the body off the cross, they wanted to make sure he was dead. So a Roman centurion took a lance and pierced it through Christ's side, puncturing his heart. And you can see the puncture mark in the side of Jesus where the lance went in. That's there in the shroud. And you can see it in magnifications of the shroud where the lance went through. So the Roman soldiers then gave Christ's followers permission to take the body down from the cross. But the point was that all the anatomy of this is correct, so that the nails especially have always impressed me, because if the nail hit the major arteries in the hand, the person being crucified could die before they were ever lifted to the cross. So nailing a person to a cross was an expert operation that required experienced executioners who knew what they were doing. And the details of this, in fact, even the bending of the legs, you can see the legs being bent.
Yes.
Which would have been a facet of, the suspension on the cross and having to move the legs to go up and down and breathe. And in fact, if you get a full picture of the body, which show the feet, it's clear one foot was placed upon the other foot and the nail driven through the 2 feet, which is again how the Romans did the crucifixion. So the body is accurate not only to the way the Romans crucified somebody, but this is clearly an extreme case where they hated this guy. going to make him do the maximum suffering. And whoever created this, if you want to imagine it's an artist, had to know all this.
Yeah.
And this has never even been reproduced crudely.
Yeah.
Let alone in the expert fashion you're looking at. This is truly miraculous. It's never been explained. And I don't think it's explicable except through divine intervention.
Well, let me just say one other thing before I play the proofs clip from Father Andrew Dalton. Just a brief, not all of the proofs that this couldn't be faked, but just some of those proofs in just 1 second. But let me just say, this artifact is the most important artifact in human history, to my knowledge. But in addition to that, and I'll play the clip at the moment where the spear is plunged into the side of Jesus in the film The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, and the Roman soldier is sprayed with the blood of the Christ, and he falls to his knees immediately, recognizing that he has done something, he's been involved in something absolutely abominable. And I think it's just so powerful because that spear has also become a valuable artifact. This is all on the historical record, guys. And this image is God giving you the proof of the existence of his son, who was crucified on the cross at Calvary, the Lord Jesus Christ. Do you want to talk a little bit about that spear that Roman soldier plunged into the side of this man?
Well, there is a spear that has been reported to have been the spear of, what is it, Lancius? I'm not remembering the name of the soldier.
Is it the Spear of Destiny? Is that what they call it?
The Spear of Destiny, they call it, yes. But there's also the name of the centurion who actually did the spearing. I'll possibly remember that in a minute. But that exists, and it has been revered, and it's been considered to be, whomever possesses it, to be a power object. And there is a lot written about Hitler possessing the Spear of Destiny. But I think to me, the most important thing, the spear is interesting to me, and may or may not be the case. But what is impossible to explain is the image in the shroud itself. And for me, what has been most convincing is that this image is so realistic. It is so anatomically accurate. It so reflects exactly what happens to a body in crucifixion. I mean, there are so many details that I'm not even sure the Roman centurions understood, in terms of when the arms have to be nailed to the cross in a way that the body can be lifting up and let down, which had to be excruciatingly painful for every breath. Now, Jesus went through 3 hours of this agony on the cross. And so he had to been which reflects that he was a strong man. This person who was in the shroud was healthy, was muscular, was strong, and was going to take some effort to kill, which meant the Romans could severely beat him, could expect to nail him on the cross and have him live long enough to suffer and die. Yet, after 3 hours, sundown's coming, and they have to spear him with a lance in order to make sure he's dead, so the Jews can take and bury him before sundown on the Sabbath. And the lance wound is seen in this picture, anatomically correct. Those are the points that convince me so much that this is completely authentic. I don't know of any way, even today, I think it stretches our understanding, as I'm going to get to in a couple minutes, but it stretches our understanding of how an image like this could have been created.
Okay. Well, let me play this clip. I think it's important. We'll stay grounded here with proofs from Father Andrew Dalton. Listen.
But it's like, how much evidence do you need? Like, if I could just take one element just to highlight this, if we were to make a list of all of those candidates, all those people who were crowned and crucified, there's exactly one person on that list, and that's Jesus of Nazareth. If there are other people that were crowned and crucified, and it may have been the case, but nobody ever wrote about it. And so what's the probability that it's not Jesus when you have this unique combination of sufferings, that you have nail wounds in the feet and in the hands, a pierced side, evidence that he carried the cross, that he was nailed to the cross, that he was crowned with thorns, that he was punched in the face? All of this is here. And then you pile on other things like pollen that is consonant with the flora that blossoms between April and May within a radius of, I think, 5 kilometers of Jerusalem. And then you have soil. This
is a very elaborate kind of hoax.
Yes, no, I want to shake this guy's hand. Like, it's like, who is this guy? Like, this guy needs
the guy on the shroud.
Absolutely. Yeah, if it's a fake, we need to develop
a following of whoever faked it.
Yeah.
To some degree, because he's a genius.
It's beyond genius. So just to give an example of this, like there's soil on the feet and knees and nose. It's terrible to think about what that implies for the Via Crucis. Like when he fell flat to his face, and some 75 to 125 pounds came crashing down on a head crowned with thorns. So the forensic doctors don't agree on much, but they agree that those thorns penetrate through the skin to the bony plate below.
Oh, Jesus.
And so that on the exactly, amen to that. But from a scientific point of view, we can study this soil that's on the feet, knee, and nose and determine its chemical composition. We know that it's calcium carbonate with a touch of strontium, and we know further its crystalline structure to be travertine aragonite, which is an extremely rare crystalline structure. And yet, according to one geologist, it matches the soil of the grottos of Jerusalem like a fingerprint, she says. And so, again, if it is fabricated in France in the Middle Ages, what in the world is it doing with soil from Palestine there, right precisely in those areas where you'd have contact with the ground?
I'm coming back to you, Doc. It seems to me that they could find Noah's Ark at the top of Mount Ararat today, photograph it, go inside it, investigate it, carbon date it, prove that it's authentic, and the mainstream horror media would say, no, it's a forgery. Wait, what's this? A video I made from 2010.
Here in eastern Turkey, Mount Ararat has long been the favorite theory. Now, a group of Turkish scientists and Noah fans, evangelical Christians from Hong Kong, claim they found chunks of his eponymous ark. We are sure, said this Turkish egghead, these parts belong to the ship of Noah. We are sure, said this Turkish egghead. Good morning, America. Nick Watt, ABC News.
Nick was perfect for that story, wasn't he?
I mean, I think that's how far gone we are now. And it reminds me of Pontius Pilate in a panicked moment, producing Jesus Christ to the crowd and giving the crowd a choice. Barabbas, the rapist, the worst man in our prison, should we set Barabbas free or Jesus Christ? I'll let the crowd choose. And the crowd, consumed by their own hubris and evil, they said, Jesus, 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 crucified Jesus. We're lost, man. I got to tell you, as in the days of Noah, literally, I feel like they could find Noah's Ark today and ABC TV would go out of its way to immediately try to debunk it.
Well, this kind of ties together my various books and show that the assassination of Jack Kennedy from the X-rays, he was hit twice from the front, and we've been lied to about it. The evil in this world does not want anything that validates God or peace to be in any way triumphant. The evil wants death, it wants war, it wants destruction, it hates God, it hates life, and it's satanic, and it's both in religion and it's in government. And time again, we get lying narratives which support the corrupt version of history. The Jim Carrey Truman Show we're supposed to believe is true. So yes, there's a powerful psychological operation, CIA-type psyop, that's run against anybody who dares to believe the Shroud of Turin is authentic, the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ. So, for instance, in the carbon testing that was done in the 1990s, immediately the stories went worldwide that it was a medieval fake, and it took a couple people who studied the shroud and found out that from the clips of the corners that were taken for the carbon dating, there had been medieval restitching with medieval cloth woven into the shroud. The shroud was in a fire in the medieval, almost destroyed. Those are the patch marks that you see. And you can see here, this is in the figure of Christ scourged and lying there is in the museum in Turin. I've been there many times. And that shows how the body would actually have looked. There was three-dimensionality. The body, the other remarkable thing about this image is it's really a hologram. The shroud is a three-dimensional image. It contains three-dimensional information. And it does show the elevation of the body, etc. Now, in the middle, my book tells the story of a priest, of Father Bartholomew, who dies and comes back to earth with a mission, and he begins experiencing the exact pain and suffering of Jesus Christ being crucified. He's going through these psychological operations where he experiences himself being whipped and scourged and nailed to the cross. All the things that Jesus suffered, he's experiencing. And this becomes a sensation in New York, and a psychiatrist, Dr. Castle, who does not believe in God, is hired to find out if this is just a mental illness. And the process of the story, I get to tell all the scientific evidence and get to present the arguments, which Dr. Castle finds out is that there's strong evidence the shroud is authentic. Now, I want to discuss how, in fact, the shroud image was created. And I did a lot of research on this and put it into the book. In fact, I have a Dr. Silver here, who was Bartholomew's a senior professor, and I have Bartholomew being a brilliant physicist who studied in relativity theory. In relativity theory, there is a phenomenon considered an event horizon. So it's, for instance, in black holes, when light gets sucked into a black hole, it goes into some other dimension. There's a dimensional transfer from this dimension to another dimension. There are other dimensions. It's not just, 4 dimensions of length, height, length, width, height, time. There's other dimensions. And so an event horizon takes something that's in this dimension and transitions it into another dimension beyond the 4 that we know. So the fundamental understanding here of the resurrection and the shroud is that at the moment of resurrection, and Jesus' body was lying on the cloth, and there are some blood stains on the cloth that reflect that the cloth touched his body. But then at the same time, the image suggests that as the resurrection was happening, Jesus levitated with the top cloth above him, not touching his body, the bottom cloth below him, not touching his body, and in an enormous burst of light, way beyond anything we could produce today. An intensity that was blinding. The body transitioned into another dimension. It was gone. But yet that transitioning put the image on the cloth. Now, the remarkable thing about the image of the Shroud of Turin is that the image on the cloth itself is only on the very top layers of the fabric. It's not deep into the fabric. It's like the cloth was singed or burned, and the image does fade over time. And so therefore, this is a singeing of the cloth. It's not a painting of the cloth. There's no paint indications here at all. That was dismissed almost from the beginning of the study. There was a study of Shroud Turin research project in the 1970s, did a lot of scientific analysis of the shroud, and I've talked to many who participated in that. But the shroud has 3-dimensional information in it. It's a hologram, and it has, as if it were, this transitioning had to have some enormous burst of light which seared the cloth to burn the image into the cloth. It's not an image deep into the cloth. If those top fibers were destroyed or gone, the image disappears. And so therefore the image is best seen in photographs taken of it, which you're looking at there. And by the way, in this photograph, you can see the feet, and one foot is bent over the other, and the legs are angled to show the leg which was placed on top, and therefore the nail was driven through, again, the bones not in the center of the foot, but the bones which would have held the foot together. So it went through that set of bones so it would be fixed there and could handle the weight of the person on the cross. And, the feet are a very important part of understanding this cloth. But that event horizon, and in the book, I, take the Castle to CERN. I talked about, how dimensionality works. I talk about there being multiple dimensions. So my understanding of what this cloth demonstrates is that at the moment of the resurrection, there was this burst of energy, and Christ's body transitioned into another dimension and was gone. And then 3 days later, when Christ reappears, the body has returned in a transformed state where it can show up here, it can show up there. It's using dimension and time in a different fashion. It's in a different dimension, a dimension that coexists with our dimension, but it's one that we are not aware of. And so I think that the body the shroud can only be understood in quantum physics terms. Now, how did an artist in medieval times understand quantum physics. We don't understand it fully today. But by the way, if you look at the picture there on the left, you can see that sole of the foot, which is pressed against the cloth. And there you have an image of when the body was touching the cloth. So some of these images here are blood directly transferred on the cloth because the cloth was touching the body. But in general, the predominant image of the body is not reflected by the cloth lying on the body either below or above. So I think this is truly a mystical moment. And I think it's a moment, and my novel expresses that this is a understanding of the multiple dimensions in which we live. In other words, when you die, you don't die, you transition into a different dimension. Life transitions, but it stays alive. And here is a picture of the moment of transition, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, coming back to life from the dead. And when he returns to earth and is seen, he's seen in a transformed, as a transformed entity who is here, but also in that other dimension. So this demands an understanding, not only that we have a miraculous image of Jesus Christ at the moment of resurrection, but to even the most advanced in science that we have today is incorporated and can be incorporated into our understanding of how this image was made. That's the most remarkable thing to me about it. And certainly no one in medieval times could possibly have had these kinds of awarenesses.
The name of the first photographer escapes me. Do you know it? Can you remember?
Secondo Pia.
Okay. Can you imagine the moment? Because I took a photography class in college with actual film, developing the actual film in a dark room and making negatives into positives, the whole thing with the water, the solutions, the chemicals. I'd done all that. And I really enjoyed it. But can you imagine taking a photograph, one of the earliest, most significant photographs in the history of humankind, and then going into the lab and discovering the negative image, that face appearing before you? And I'll tell you, when that happens, guys, in a dark room, it doesn't happen instantaneously. It takes a minute. It takes a couple minutes. You're floating this photographic paper in this solution, and slowly the image comes into fruition, the positive image. It's just astounding. The man must have surely wept. I mean, how would you not when that face came into fruition? And he had no idea what he was about to see.
Well, I did a lot of photography. In the 1950s, my father had a sideline of doing photographs for the union members, and I would spend the weekends in the darkroom developing and printing the photographs with him as a kid. He had to produce these quickly, and so I and my brother we both learned photography with negatives very early on. I did a lot of photography in my life. I had one-man shows of my photography when I was in my 20s. I actually developed dicoupler photography, which is the original color way to produce color images on black and white film, essentially with dyes. So I've done a lot of photography, and I understand photography very deeply. I also had to understand photography very deeply to understand the negatives in the book I've written with David Mantic on the final analysis of JFK's assassination, because X-rays are negatives. And I understand the properties of negatives, and understand the mathematics of them. So this shroud is so authentic in so many different ways, including the shading of the body. Now, as to your point, yes, a negative develops slowly. And if Secondo Pia was standing there watching it, he had to feel like he was watching a miracle as this image emerged. If he'd left the darkroom and come back in, he would have been shocked to see what he saw, because the looking at the shroud and not understanding negative photography and not imagining the shroud itself was a negative, and so that the negative was now a positive, would have taken a real mind twist, and have been amazing to think, how could anyone have produced this? And are you looking at the face of Jesus Christ for the first time in 2,000 years? And the answer to those questions is yes. Frightens the demons that want to destroy God, want to negate God. And so that's why it's been so difficult to get the shroud accepted as a true photograph of the resurrection. I wrote this novel because I feel that it will be made into a movie. I feel that once the world is ready to understand that this is not only a photograph of Jesus Christ at the moment of resurrection, but it explains the law of physics in which we live at a deeper consciousness than we are aware. In other words, it also validates what we call an afterlife. It validates other dimensions in which we exist, different dimensions in which our consciousness may not be the same. We may be transformed into another kind of entity, but yet we continue to live. And there are consequences to how we live, because these other dimensions reflect what happens here. So it is an unlocking puzzle, the more you understand it, of not only the moment of resurrection, which affirms Jesus Christ in the biblical story and his remarkable properties as divine, but also explains the complexity and the divinity and the spirituality of the existence in which we reside, and gets us beyond our traditional, normal, everyday perception of 4 dimensions, and our life is from birth to death, which obviously, if this kind of a resurrection can occur, if there is a transformative state to which we pass, we may not all have a photograph of that moment taken, but there has to be tremendous energy transition as we go from this dimension into whatever the next dimension is. And so I think this image is remarkable, not only for its historical importance, but also for its spiritual importance of understanding that this is a spiritual reality in which we live, and it only appears physical, but it is not, in essence, a physical reality.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And the reason I wanted to have this conversation is not only because the Shroud of Turin has always fascinated me and moved my spirit, but because the forces aligned against humanity in our public schools, frankly, in our own government, especially in the blue states, but in Washington, D.C. above all, they want our young people to feel a sense of nihilism. The New World Order wants our young people to not believe in a God, not believe in a creator, not believe in a higher power. And by virtue of that, believing that they are sitting on this pale blue dot where their lives are insignificant and short and meaningless, and all by accident, well, that type of nihilism creates a very sick society and a very hopeless generation. And that is the goal of the New World Order. That's why they want to remove God from the schools, from the town square, and from our judicial system. Frankly, they want to remove it from our government altogether. What does it say on our dollar bills? The fiat currency? Well, it used to say, I guess it still does, but they want to get rid of the fiat as well and give you a CBDC. In God we trust. Their God is a different God than the one we're talking about, Jerome. But you see my point? They have tried very hard to remove God and our biblical founding, our Christian foundings from our society, thereby turning our children, our offspring, into nihilistic, hopeless Autobots that will do whatever the government tells them to do because the higher power no longer exists. That's the whole goal of the New World Order, isn't it?
Yes, and I consider the Shroud of Turin the most important artifact or relic that has ever existed, because it contains so much information that it's transformative to us comprehending it. And that's, I think, its purpose, is that it gets us, demands that we contemplate beyond our normal time-space comprehension of our existence. It's truly a miraculous relic. It's a miraculous artifact, or whatever. I consider a photograph of the moment of the resurrection, and it cannot be comprehended until we accept that there is God, that we are spiritual beings, that there is a life beyond this. There are consequences, and that to consider this to be a godless place, Satan run, humans could be put on the throne of running things, is patently absurd, and will reduce human beings to being beast-like, which we're capable of being. And so I think the contemplation of the shroud is going to be fundamental to, hopefully, as we transform into another age, which I'm confident we will. God is sovereign. God's going to win. We are going to have to transform into fundamentally different understandings of our existence, and they're going to have to be spiritual.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're hitting that great awakening and a tipping point as people are becoming more and more aware of what I just described, the New World Order. And the last thing I'll just say is that one of the last things the Lord Jesus said while hanging on that cross is, "It is finished." Do you think that his loving Father would not have captured the resurrection? Do you think the God, that the creator of this world, our loving God would not have captured an artifact, a photograph of the most important event in human history? See, because that's what I think this is. It is a documentation by God himself of the most powerful thing that ever happened in the history of mankind. So y'all can believe it or not believe it. We just wanted to present the case that the Shroud of Turin is indeed the burial linen that Jesus Christ was wrapped in after his crucifixion. Doc, I want to show your book here. And what year did this come out? The Shroud Codex.
I believe 2010. April, that's exactly 14 years ago. Almost in April, we're at April 30th when we're doing this show. This was April 13th, 2010. It's April 30th, 2024.
That's kind of divine in itself, isn't it? Because I think our last interview was probably around April 13th. So that's very serendipitous.
I agree. And as I say, I think when this book is made into a movie, will be a signal that the world is transforming into a comprehension that rejects Satan.
Amen. All right. I always enjoy our conversations. You've written so many books. We should probably get another one on the calendar. But until then, I want to thank you so much for your time. Our guest has been Dr. Jerome Corsi. Thank you, Doc.
My great pleasure. Thank you, Sean.
Friends, I hope this moved you as much as this subject moves me. And I'll remind you every single day for free. Check us out for free at SGT Report to get the antidote to corporate propaganda and all of those ABC News, CBS, NBC Nightly News with the CIA asset, Lester Holt. Get the antidote to all of that propaganda at sgtreport.com 24/7. Till next time, God bless you and yours. Bye-bye.
I just think our understanding of it demands it's more than just an image of the resurrection. It's an instruction to us of the nature of reality, which affirms